Hey guys, welcome to the Contractor Commute. We're going to continue on the theme of building a successful construction business and just keeping your business from failing. Just depends on, I guess, where you're at as a business right now. In previous episodes, we've talked about just a few topics that are around, just building the successful business, and talked about growing as a craftsman. We've talked about learning and managing your back office processes, estimating accurately, and today we're going to touch on sales and marketing. So we're going to have some fun.
Cramming a lot in lately.
Yeah,
yes.
I know. Trying to really encompass all of, not all of what it takes, because there's more than what we're talking
summary,
about.
A cursory review.
Yeah, here's a few of the hats that you have to be experts in, right?
Yes.
But no, I think it'd be fun. Maybe give us a horror story.
Oh, wow.
A sales horror story.
Yeah.
So like of a time, that was a poor sales experience. Either you were selling a project and it was terrible, or just outside of context of construction.
I'll start with somebody else selling me something, because I've learned so much from being sold about the selling process.
Okay.
I'm just reflecting on, and I had this person call me up and they were selling insurance, and it was pretty obvious in the first 10 seconds that this person didn't know a whole lot from my perspective about insurance. We could, usually when somebody doesn't know a topic very well, they speak very vaguely about things, and they ask you more questions than they're trying to really explain.
Yeah.
They're not as much around how can we help you. They're more about, I'm trying to sell a project and earn a commission.
Sure.
So I was very sort of not in the mood for being sold something, but I still wanted to be nice about it. So I was like, hey, you got 30 seconds, go.
Yeah.
And as soon as I said that level of pressure just was overwhelming. The person just turned to a completely like, they couldn't
didn't know what to
speak
say.
hardly, because they couldn't sell the product.
Yeah.
And so maybe it's not a horror story so much. It was just really insightful to me. If I can't sell my product in such a short period of time where I know it well enough, and if and we've done this even in our current business of it's very hard to summarize what you're doing. So maybe not a horror story, and then personally, when I first started the construction side, selling construction, now it's not the first sales experiences, but I didn't know exactly what niche I wanted to be in, right? I knew what I could do. I knew the directions I could possibly go. There was very broad an experience as far as different things I could potentially do. So when I would go to a job, it was very hard to kind of narrow it down. People would say, well, we could do this, could do that. And you listen to all these things about, I didn't know who my ideal customer was. I didn't know our wheelhouse of what really worked for us. And I think a lot of people starting a business are in that position.
For sure. Like you're wanting to say yes to lots of work.
Yes.
And so you're like, I can do it all. I'll learn it if I don't know
Very hard
it
to
now.
say no in that context, because you
sure.
feel like you're at the mercy of the person you're selling
Absolutely.
to. And so I got myself into a lot of sales situations where I should have never even been there. I remember a couple of times where you could tell this person's just looking for a steal. They didn't necessarily even care about me whatsoever, as far as being fair to both directions, and being like, why am I even trying? Why am I even wasting my time on this particular job? And I know we'll get more into that later. But that's happened so many times where I was not in the driver's seat in the sales situation. The person was like, we could do this, and listening, and and I think it's important to listen. But
sure.
Yeah. I don't know if I've ever had this disastrous sales experience. That always came later after it was sold.
It was downstream effects.
Yeah. Well, and maybe that is the horror story where you sell a job too cheap and you don't know what you're doing. And later on it becomes the horror thing,
it could go lots of different ways.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think I've had a couple like that where on the front end of it, people are very, they're looking at everything with a fine-tooth comb.
Sure.
And what about this? And what about this? And it says here this, and that should be a clue. This person is very detail oriented, and what am I missing?
Yeah.
And because that might be the stick they beat you up with later, and they're like, yeah, we loved your proposal, and let's go ahead and do the work.
Yeah.
And then the other person is like, well, it says here that you're doing 2 of those, and we actually talked about 3, or
so can I get a refund or
it
whatever?
It can be kind of a double-edged sword there.
For sure.
What about you?
I think mine is an experience. It was a car salesman, which most terrible.
Why do they have such a bad rap?
I'm like, there's some maybe that are really great at it, but anyways, no, we went to a dealership and we were buying a new car, and it was an awesome experience with the sales guy. Yeah. And then the closer had to come in.
Oh no.
And I was like, instantly my blood pressure went up. I was like, I don't want to be here anymore. And he's like, so how can we get you to, leave with this car today? And I'm like, that's just so I'm like, honestly, if the guy who was, we went on the test drive with and all that, if he would have been the one that followed through all the way through, we probably would have bought the car that day. But I was like, for the principle of what's happening right now, the fact that you have to go get a closer to come in, I'm like, this is just so cringy. Yeah. And I've been in sales, so I'm like, not fun at all. I'm like,
and I like the fact that you will push back in those situations. I think that pressure where you're saying, hey, listen, this is a pressure tactic and I'm out.
Yeah.
And that's great.
Yeah.
You have the maturity to kind of recognize that in a moment. But that guy is manipulating a lot of people by just putting the pressure on.
Taking advantage. Anyways. Yeah. But I think too, though, like speaking to this topic, I'm like, if people listening are introverted, this topic is probably one that they'd like to maybe avoid.
Yes.
Or is a really hard part of running a business and building a business.
How do you see that play out in situations you've noticed where somebody's introverted? What are some of the, I mean, before we talk about solutions, how does that pan out in how you talk to somebody or what you're thinking about? And
do you mean like on the client side or if
if you're the introverted contractor or builder or tradesperson and you're going out to, sell something?
Yeah.
What does that feel like from the people that you know that are more on the introverted scale? Like, there's not many introverted salespeople.
No, it's true.
It's more
kind of a qualifier
right?
at that point.
Right.
Yeah, it's true. And I think a lot of it is what tends to show up is like avoidance in really emphasizing that side. And so a pipeline of projects will dry up if you are introverted. Like there's the tendency there might be like I'm going to avoid that at all costs. I think we've talked about that on other episodes as well. But I think what I see is really just it's a skill. Selling is a skill. And I think even if you are introverted, like you kind of have to put on your extroverted hat a little bit of like, hey, these are real people. I try, even in moments, because I'm like, I'm for sure extroverted, but there's moments where I'm like, oh, I really don't want to go talk to a stranger, or whatever. Like I just have moments like that.
Burnt out.
Yeah. And I try to put on my like, okay, for 10 minutes, I can be like this way, and I'm not saying like being not who you are, but just I think understanding and being able to like see, because the person you're selling to might also be introverted.
Good point.
And that might be okay, and it might even be okay to speak to, this is out of my comfort zone. Like, I think it's okay to speak to some of those things that are like, I think it builds trust of like, hey, now you're going to see me as a real person. If I'm like, hey, I really like this part of the job. Like, I don't want you to feel sold. That's not my goal here. You know what I mean? Speaking to the elephant in the room a little bit like that, I think can actually build a lot of trust. So I think you can use being introverted to your advantage even.
I think there's a certain level of trust, like you just brought out, that you might not even be able to build if you were extroverted or really sales minded in the sense of just being matter of fact about things, being authentic to your personality and then coming in. But at the same time, to your point, you've got to be able to show up.
Right.
You got to be able to engage. You got to be able to sell. Yeah. But at the same time being like, okay, this is the product we're selling. This is the benefit to them. You don't have to you don't have to turn on an alternate personality to be a salesperson. Yeah. I think that can be a thing that works. Yeah,
it can. And one of the things I learned in just some of my sales training was, there's something called a DISC assessment. But anyways, it's just like understanding different personalities. There's tons of personality tests. That's not the end all be all, but understanding different personalities and being able to modify how you speak to who you're meeting with, like picking up on certain, ideas.
So how could somebody implement that?
Well, I'm even to your point earlier about, a detail oriented person.
Yes.
You probably need to come with some more data and some more facts and some more, like that's probably like proving to that side of it. So just knowing, or like even just planning some of that of like, hey, how am I gonna speak to somebody who's like very direct, like answer them directly. You know what I mean? Like they're direct, they want to be responded to directly. So I think even just like little hints like that are really helpful in learning sales of like, first, realize they're a person. They put their pants on the same way,
Or do they?
No, you said that. And like, they do. No,
okay, I'm just be technical.
Anyways, and so like just before you even go into like a setting to where it's like you're meeting with a potential customer or something like that, I think it's just being like, hey, they're people too. Like go in as like, hey, I'm consultative and I'm discovery and I don't have to win the job. I think a lot of pressure goes away whenever you kind of wrap your mind around like you don't actually have to win every job because not every job is right for your business.
Interjecting, I had a salesperson that had that mindset where he came in decent base level salary, but he needed to win jobs in order to keep a job, in order to have a commission. Sure. And he went in aggressive because he wanted a commission, and it just did not work at all. I mean, and he was an experienced salesperson, but he should know better. But it came across so bad I had so many people complain.
It's called commission breath. That's what it's called. That's what I've heard in my sales experience.
Yeah. Oh, he had the commission breath. I was like, oh man.
Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah. It's a lot to take in. But no, that's kind of one thing. But I think a couple other just notes that I was, as I was reflecting on like this episode of just maybe even like practical things of how to level up in the selling side and interject and add in, but one of the things I was thinking about that's helped me a lot to stay on top of things, especially when there's so many moving pieces, is having a system for tracking who are my prospects.
Yep.
Like I know there's CRMs for that, task management systems, things like that. Having an actual system to where it's like you can track your prospects. You can set follow-up reminders for yourself, because as you're selling jobs, a lot of it is about timing.
Yep.
And so it's like I might have the idea as a homeowner that I want to redo my bathroom, and I do. At some point in the next 5 years, I want to redo my bathroom.
Right.
You know what
So
I'm saying?
This is on your list.
Right.
Yep.
And so I might engage with a contractor just to kind of get an idea of budget when I'm really not even in the buying cycle, as a customer. And so understanding where people are at when you're having that initial conversation, I think is really, really important of like, what is your timeline? What is, just understanding qualifying. We've talked about that in previous episodes. And then having a system to track that. So it's like if you discover a prospect's, hey, this is a year out project.
Yep.
Sounds good. Like pricing's probably going to change in a year anyways. So don't waste your time as a contractor estimating a job.
Yep.
Wait and follow up in 9 months.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And then restart the conversation. Because I think the whole follow-up thing is a lot of people stop following up if they don't get a response. But I think people are just really busy. And I think if you're not pushy in your follow-up and you're just like, hey, we talked 9 months ago.
Right.
I'd mentioned that I'd reach out to you to see if anything's changed in terms of your timeline.
Yeah.
Has anything changed? Do you want to connect? Is this something that's on your plans for the next year, kind of thing? So anyways, that's just one thing of having a system, tracking it and following up and being diligent about follow-up, because I think it evokes trust for customers down the road.
100%. I think another time, this might tie in with personalities as well, as some people have a very hard time being told no. And I think also one of the things that I'm learning is there's different types of no's, and sometimes it's just it doesn't fit at all, right? It's just a flat no, and it should be accepted as a no. And a lot of times they're very soft no's we take as a no, but they're not, the customer's not really telling us no.
Right.
They might be just being,
not
to
right
your
now.
point of just being like, it's not now, or something's got to change in their life. They're trying to close on a loan, or they're trying to sell their other house, or they're trying to, they're still kicking the tires. And so you're just saying, okay, well, do I even want to track this beyond that point? Because maybe you just don't have the capacity for it. You're too busy as it is. And just canceling that out of your mind might be the thing to do.
Yep.
But if you want to keep and I think in my business, we kind of employed, if things went stale and we followed up multiple times and it just wasn't worth tracking.
Sure.
Because there was enough work without that.
Yeah. And that's got to be the gauge, right? Like,
right.
You've got to, if you're overloaded with jobs, then you're going to be like serving the ones.
And I know you personally have sold things that people have told you no on.
Oh yeah.
Initially.
Yeah.
I mean,
I had clients where I followed up for 2 years with people, and it was not a pushy follow up. It was to the point of like, hey, can I reach back out in 3 months to see if you're in a different spot? Like no pressure. If it's a no, totally let me know.
Back I try to your system and process, though, is you had a way of tracking something 3 months from now.
I would have forgotten.
Right.
Because I would have, I would have lost the
content. And you're
content.
farming this whole pipeline of work of ideal clients, qualified people you want to work with, but the timing's wrong.
Right. Exactly. And so, and that can be true. It's, again, to your point of like, not everything's a hard no. A lot of it, what I found, it really is timing.
Yeah. And respecting no's, I think, is important, though, because there's nothing like somebody that just, we've been back to the whole thing we started off with of kind of the horror stories, but we learn what not to do by people doing it sometimes. And I've been sold multiple times by this annoying person where you're like flat out hard no. Yeah. And you told them so.
Sure.
And I've learned to be more direct in that regard too, of like, no, this is not a good fit. Sorry. Bye. Yeah. But then that person keeps reaching out. It's like, now you really are wasting your time. Yeah. At that point. And not only that, you're annoying somebody.
Totally. Yeah. Because then you're really burning your reputation versus building it. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's important. And I think we talked a little bit about qualifying the job, but then like, let's say you actually like a meeting makes sense. The project makes sense. Maybe talk me through, like what that meeting should be like. I'm thinking, we've talked about being an educator. We've talked about just that process of it, like how much detail you should give about, hey, when other clients, other clients we've worked with have decided this or what, maybe run me through an example, like real world example of that.
One of the things we have to remind ourselves is when you are an expert in a particular, whatever it is you're selling, your service, your product, the person you're selling to typically is not.
Right.
And there's a certain level of patience that we need to come into the situation with, and not just assume, well, what an idiot. Like, they just don't know.
Right.
It's sort of like talking to your kids, right? I mean,
For
we have a certain level of innate patience we have with our child, because we realize, I mean, my 9-year-old isn't going to understand or doesn't have the context or knowledge yet, but he wants to get it. And so there's a certain level, I don't expect him to know something.
Right.
We're talking about rocket science. He's getting into something like that. And
he's
it's
excited
like,
about it. But
right.
Not,
exactly. He's not an expert, and neither would I
Sure.
expect him to. And it's similar to a lot of the customers we sell to.
True.
And I think that's kind of that first meeting is sometimes less about just trying to wow them of like your company, but being the listener in the situation as well, of just wanting, and then taking the question and realizing when something sounds off the wall, it's not just like, whoa, it's just being, and seeing where you get with that. You're probing to see, are you dealing with somebody that's a know-it-all that doesn't know anything?
Yes.
And if you have that as a client, maybe they're not a good fit either. Because we've had a couple of times you go out to try to qualify and somebody's like, this is exactly what we want. We don't need your experience. We don't need and if that's your value proposition, then that's probably not a good fit, because they don't value what you're bringing to the table.
It's true.
And I've had the other side of it would be coming to the table with a certain level of quality and saying, we do custom homes and high-end trim work. And that person's like, well, you just want it slapped together. Well, you're a bad fit.
Right.
Because you're going to be trying to come up with a quality standard that they don't even want or want to pay for.
Yeah.
So a
Call
lot
it what it is.
of clues, right, along
sure.
the process. So that first meeting is you qualifying them as much as them qualifying you.
Totally. I think one of the things, you mentioned being quick to listen, slow to speak, like certainly I think of.
That can't be overstated.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that goes along with that is some of the best like relationships have been built from asking follow-up questions. So not just like, yes, it's great to ask an awesome, good question up front. But then like almost listening to what they say, of course, and then being like, hey, when you said this, what did you mean? I know that sounds like counselor like language, but it's actually like they will go off into so much more detail if you ask that follow-up question, which might set you up for success later. You know what I mean? So I can't overstate the question of like, hey, what did you mean when you said this? Like just to re-clarify in a conversation, in a selling conversation, in really any conversation, but sales specifically to this episode. I think that's something, what did you mean when you said that? Or can you give me an example of how that's happened? They're just going to tell you so much more information that you wouldn't get otherwise.
I love that, because you are also going to have people that are going to give you very shallow answers sometimes, because they just want the information. They don't realize how it all ties together. And so when you help them see why you're asking that question as well, I mean, this comes back to the budget question, right? I mean, if you ask somebody, well, what's your budget? They're going to beat all around the issue, because they're thinking this is sort of this, if you say $100,000, you're going to charge them $100,000. Yeah. And so they're like, well, I'm not sure. What do you think something like this should cost? We're thinking $10,000. Yeah. And they don't realize you're disqualifying them by saying $10,000 for $100,000. Yeah. And so I think sometimes just letting them know ranges of values of saying, hey, we kitchen remodels, like that was the thing we did a lot of, kitchens additions. And well, on that type of remodel, that ranges from $30,000 to $150,000 typically. Depending
on your taste.
And it can be more, it could be less, depending on what you're looking for. And really just kind of letting them know. The whole reason why we ask a budget is not to figure out what we can charge you for, but to really kind of understand, well, what types of fixtures and cabinets and what range of values should we even be trying to make sure work for you? Yeah,
I think exactly what you said is something like in that example of like, hey, the reason we're asking you for a budget, like tell them why
there you go.
You're asking for
Back
it.
to the directness.
Yeah, because that way it'll like lay down their guard a little bit, and then they'll be like, oh, okay, I now understand that you're not trying to just take advantage of me, and those kinds of things. It does change the scope of the project. It does change if it makes sense to
one of my mentors, he would go into projects and tell people, he would try to scare them off, because a lot of his work was higher end, and he wanted good jobs. He was experienced enough to know he had a skill, he had experience, he wanted good jobs. He wasn't trying to get his name. He had a name. And so when he'd go into a job, he'd say, well, on the high end, this can be $200,000. And he knew he could do it for $75,000 in some situations, but he wanted the person not to balk at $200,000.
Totally.
And then they'd say, okay, yeah, $200,000, I get it. And then he'd work from there. So it was interesting.
It's good.
Know what you're selling, know what the range is. And it's way better to come under than over.
Oh, for sure.
And he'd still come over sometimes.
But come in the middle, what I mean? Or wherever, depending on the project. Or use allowances, right? To actually be able to have the conversation of like, hey,
help people understand kind of how things could break down and give them that power to say, well, if you want to go buy a $1,500 sink versus a $500 one, that's another $1,000 you could spend if you want to, but that's one more $1,000 that you didn't count on spending.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. No, it's good. Any other thoughts on sales? We can kind of jump into marketing a little bit too.
Okay. Yes. Right. I think there's a certain level of there's a methodical process you brought up. I think there's also this level of patience you have to have with it as well, and keeping enough leads out there. Another thing that I think is really important in sales, particularly if you have a small team, is making sure you don't kind of assume more deals are going to work out than they do. And I think this is a really tempting thing for a lot of salespeople is they look at, I've got $780,000 worth of jobs out there and I only need to close 200,000. And so we should be in good shape.
Yeah.
They don't assume anything about it. Keep that pipeline full, first come, first serve kind of a thing. And really, in order to really be healthy in your sales, you've got to really realize that not all jobs are going to close. Not everybody's going to close when you want them to close. And just communicate frankly to people like, we need to keep things busy here.
Yeah.
And so, and not hold slots for people that aren't going to necessarily pull the trigger and actually accept your bid. Yeah,
that's a good point. So in terms of like a lot of jobs, I think are friends and family happens a lot. And so it's like you feel like you need to like work friends and family in. I feel like that might be a tendency. Maybe speak to that in terms of you mentioned not holding slots for people so that way your business can actually grow and you can keep, making money. Because back to the timing thing, you don't know when timing's going to happen. Yep. How did you manage that? Or did you get family jobs and stuff like that along the way? How'd you manage that?
So most of my family is in a different state. So I didn't get a lot of family work. My extended family, my wife's family is all local. So I moved when we got married. And so there hasn't been a whole lot of family work. There have been friends and I think they feel like they should take some precedence. And I think because I want to be able to do something doesn't mean I can do something.
Sure.
And so I need to keep that in my mind when I'm going to that situation of just being like, okay, the business is number one, the crew, keeping them busy, keeping bills paid, and just kind of speaking frankly, while we are booking out 8 months from now, I had a great example of this a couple of weeks ago. Electrician, we need a little bit of work done here. Some circuitry is not working here, and our electrician. So we got like one outlet's not working. And so I called the electrician about it. And he said, we're booked out probably 2 months right now.
Yeah.
He said, probably it's going to be end of January. He said, I'm telling you that because there's a good chance we're going to have a slot open up sooner than that. But I know I can put you on the books for January 30th.
So great.
And so he's got a date for me.
Yep.
And it's further out than we wanted it. I mean, we wanted this thing fixed like as soon as possible, but he put a date on it and we're okay with that date. And if we weren't okay with that date, we'd find somebody else to do it.
Yeah.
And I think that helps with just anybody.
Well, and I think it sets it up for success versus taking on more things than you can do. Yeah. Like you said, like if you're working for friends and family, the tendency might be to fit them in, but it might not actually be a great experience if you don't have the bandwidth to fulfill it. Yeah.
And you're also setting this expectation. Anytime you're very flexible with somebody, you're also setting the expectation with them that is the status quo.
Right.
And so the next hiccup that comes along in the project, material don't show up on time. They want to add on additional work. You're letting them know, well, not everything's going to go according to plan, and we're going to roll with the punches. We're going to do whatever it takes. And I have found that the people that I've rolled over backwards for and just really did everything I possibly could to make them happy were the least appreciative, the worst people I've ever worked for.
Yeah.
It was the weirdest thing. I still don't understand that. There's some psychology behind that. I'm not a psychologist. But it's like, why is it the person you give them discounts, you work around the clock, you try to meet a deadline that's impossible because they came up with it.
They're not appreciative.
And they're like, why are you late? I'm like, you guys came up with the date. That wasn't me. I'm like, you said, can you get this done by Friday? And we said, well, maybe. Yeah. And they're like, why is it not done Friday?
Right.
So instead of anyway, I learned from that though, is because you told them at the beginning, they call the shots.
Sure.
And so the same level of pressure they applied at the beginning to get you to do something, they're going to apply throughout the job, at the tail end of the job, everything. You told them, you're in the driver's seat and we will be boss around.
Yeah. It's a good
Instead
call
of at
out.
the beginning, you're saying, you know what? No, we're in the driver's seat and we're going to do our very best to accommodate you, but it's not the opposite.
Yeah. It's a really good call out. I like that.
And suddenly you go from people being mad at you to being like, classic example. Somebody told me last week they had a customer they had to push off, but they kind of had this expectation set from the beginning of, we're going to do our very best, but we're not making unrealistic expectations. And they had a crew member quit, and they went back and said, you know what, we're a little short staffed. We're probably going to be a couple weeks behind what we're hoping for, but we're still within that window. What a great spot to be.
So great. And you can be proactive in that versus reactive in everything.
Yeah, because you're calling out too, like they're going to see what happened to George. Yeah. Why is he not in the crew anymore?
Right.
And you're calling that out and saying, yeah, I think we're still going to be close to the window, probably towards the tail end of it because we had this happen. But then you look like a genius to that person too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, suddenly you foresaw an unplanned situation.
Sure.
And sometimes you're outside the window, but
that's good.
You're still in the driver's seat.
Yeah, that's good. So let's talk a little bit about marketing.
Yes.
I think we tried to tackle sales and marketing in the
we
same
tried to
episode
tackle it a lot in this episode.
because it's like it all really is together. Like your brand is the outward facing, side of your business.
Without marketing, you don't have sales.
Yeah, exactly. And so
typically.
Yeah. And so I think one of the points just that I've been reflecting on as I meet with construction companies a lot, things like that is, if you're really looking to scale your business, or you want to sell your business someday.
That's a good point.
You need to have a brand and a brand that is outside of just you.
Yeah.
Eventually. I'm not saying you start that way. You start with, hey, you're the brand. You're the one that's doing it all. That's true. But if you want to scale and if you want to potentially sell your business someday or have another location or, there's lots of different growth
I guess the thought that comes to mind on that too is just to make sure that nobody gets overwhelmed by that initially as well, because I think there's stages of businesses and
for sure.
And if we would have taken that kind of mindset when we started Congenius or any other business, it would have been overwhelming to start off from day one and say, let's talk about selling this. It's like, no, let's talk about starting it.
Yeah, true.
Before you might have a general idea of what an exit strategy could look like.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But you don't want to start with the end.
For sure.
Other than maybe just having a goal.
Yeah.
That, so anyway,
But yeah, no, that's good.
Yeah, just to make sure we're not getting people kind of overwhelmed with this, like, oh my goodness, I didn't even thought of that.
Yeah.
I mean, and
right.
I don't want my business to die with me. But some subtle things that come out of that though, because it is a good point though. Yeah. But how you brand it, is this something you want to pass down generationally? A lot of businesses, Conley and whatever, and they're going to have, generations of Conleys that started with Grandpa Conley. And then there's, my dad had a business like that similarly. My younger brother is running lots of aspects of that business now. He still is it's still centered around him a lot. So I don't know what happens in the future when he retires.
And that's okay. Like there's nothing wrong with that either. But it's just like dependent on where you want to go.
Yeah. But sorry, I went off too far in that on the rabbit trail. But the marketing point is probably not as like marketing as we might think it is either. Because I mean, what are these kinds of subtle so-called marketing things that we need to do that really aren't maybe as it's not like pulling out an ad in the newspaper.
No. Yeah. I think if we're talking practically about just some marketing tactics or things that you can do, bare minimums, I think a good place to start would be like start with a logo, right?
Yes,
like have a logo for your business. Like if you have nothing, you have a business name, like make it a logo and you can do that super inexpensive.
Yep.
You could build a logo on Canva, for
$15. There's a cool suggestion
or
on this
AI.
too. Well, I haven't explored that option yet, but there's a site called freelancer.com.
Yep.
And you can post a project up there. And if you set it up as a contest, you'll be like, here's a general idea of what I want for a logo, colors I like, and logos that I like. You post it as a project and it sets up as a contest and you'll put it like, I'll pay $200 for it. Yeah. You'll get 150 people submitting unique logos back and choose the winner and you just pay them $200.
Yeah.
It's a cool it's cool. I mean, I've done that multiple times.
Yeah. So get a logo, $200. I mean, you can get it less too.
Yes, you can.
There's, or hire, have your cousin build one. You know what I mean? Like there's so many designers.
As long as there's some level of skill that they've sort of demonstrated.
Agreed.
Where you're not making them mad. Their concept.
Yeah, true.
That's the problem with cousin.
That is a risk. Family work is always risky. But I think starting with a logo, and then because then that logo can be used on all of your estimates, on your proposals, on your, that's an extension of your brand. Anywhere that is, your brand is also. I think another thing that I see all the time that I appreciate and I think is a really wise decision in the construction space is truck wraps or decals. I'm like,
they're a lot less expensive than you think too.
Way less expensive. And it's like, it's a moving billboard and it's wherever you go. So if you're doing work in a neighborhood, the neighbor's going to see it, when you're there. And so I'm like, and then, if you want to get crafty, then leave a flyer behind at their house when you leave, you know what I mean? Just things like that are not expensive, like big, marketing's kind of scary because you can do a million things with it, with like everything. Right. But, I think you can just pick a few things to do and then test it, see if it works, and it can be a fun process.
I love both of those. Start with a logo, get a truck wrap. Some of the other like traditional things are probably not as effective in today's society. Like, yard signs can kind of be annoying in some areas. Sure. People won't let you put them up. People are more private. The less,
True.
It's probably not as much of a thing. Some of the like older generation might let you do some of that stuff, but
True.
like nobody's putting a sign in my yard telling people they did my roof. Like I'm just not going to go along with that.
So that's where I'm like, hey, just work up.
You're there for 3 days.
Quick flyer, drop it off at their door.
There you go.
And then go.
Right. And I think a lot of times that neighbor relationship you're talking about is powerful.
It is.
They see that truck wrapped however long that you're in that driveway for. And then they're asking you, well, how did that experience go? What do you have done? People are nosy.
Yeah,
for sure. They're going to be popping over the fence saying, hey, how's that project coming along?
Yep.
And you're like, yeah, they did great work.
Yeah.
And but you can't beat a referral like that. We had one neighborhood. We did an entire block of homes and not a single person was marketed to overtly. It was just us being in that driveway parked.
Yeah.
Next thing you know, the neighbor across the street's like, we're thinking about doing an addition. We need to do that. And next thing you know, it's like it just spreads.
You can fill up your year's worth of work in a neighborhood
without ever spending $1 on marketing per se. But you are marketing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I love those concepts. And there's probably the website part too. You're probably going there next.
Yeah, it's on the list. I think, I would say Google business listing or Facebook page is free. You can do both of those things. I think a lot of contractors are a little bit afraid of that in case they get negative reviews, but what I would say to that is use those free channels and just respond to any comments really well, any reviews really well. Like don't put gas on the fire if it is a negative situation, just have a pleasant response. And then when people are looking for reviews, I don't expect to go to a business that has all 5-star reviews.
In fact, I'm a little suspicious.
I am too.
You're like, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe not suspicious, but you wonder of the authenticity of the reviews.
Yep. Yeah. I'm like, okay, they just called their friends and family versus like actual
5-star reviews.
Yeah.
I mean, if you see a business has 600, they didn't make it up.
Oh,
I mean, you're like, wow, that's amazing what they've done there. But there's 3 5-star reviews. You're like, how far out there are they?
Yep.
I had one negative review in the course of my construction business. And it was over an issue where I never even did work for the person. They ended up just a real hot-headed, weird situation where we had given them a budget number, and next thing you know, they are holding that like that is. You said you'd do it for that amount. And my salesperson went out there and said, I mean, sounds like you have a decent budget. We'll give you a quote and see what it comes out as.
Sure.
And they wanted their entire, it was just such a stupid example of them wanting an entire house remodeled and adding stuff onto it all the time. And then the number increasing. And it just seemed like they never even wanted to engage in the first place. But there was a design fee they didn't want to pay. And so we discounted it half, and they still were mad. It was just like a no-win situation. Probably should have never even bothered with this person in the first place. Should have ran probably, this kind of, there's probably should have been some clues. But anyway, it was one of those situations where you just should have just ran in the first place. But nonetheless, responding without being emotional is how you deal with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no,
just be like, very clean, professional response, and I think people respect that. I mean, I look at reviews on restaurants or whatever, and you see somebody like, the food was terrible, the service was terrible, and you kind of get the tone of somebody that's just a whiner and you never make them happy anyway.
True. Usually a lot of people who leave a lot of reviews or leave negative reviews leave a lot of reviews. You'll see, so you can dive into that.
Right,
anyways.
That's true. Review history.
Yeah.
All 1-star reviews for all these places.
Exactly.
Yeah, good point.
But and then I would just say website and paid advertising, like other marketing channels, would be other things to explore.
Yep.
But get your feet under you first, and I think when you're ready to grow or maybe have some sales support and things like that, it depends on where you're at as a business, of when to maybe roll some of that stuff out.
That's a good point. Yeah.
But,
so what are your final thoughts?
Gosh, my final thoughts are, oh my gosh, I have too many thoughts. I said all my final thoughts. No, I'm just
That's pretty good.
No,
yeah.
I think don't be afraid of sales and marketing would be my final thoughts. It would be learn from every experience, learn who you're working with, selling to, because then that'll just help you communicate more effectively and just realize that they're people. And so what would you want if you're being, if you're signing up for a project or things like that on the sales side and marketing too, like what would.
I think one of the things that I've learned is you're not a good fit for everybody as a business or as a person. There's personality, perspectives, and to kind of walk in every job. I've had a kind of this false idea in my head that by walking to a job where the service is aligned, that it was a good alignment, where it's like they needed a roof done and we do roofs, so we should be doing the job. And instead of it just, and I know it seems maybe like, well, that's work, like we want to win that job, but be very cautious with the qualifying process. Make sure you get the right jobs, not just any jobs. And they're worth winning. I mean, the margins are better. They're great customers, the referrals. I mean, all the downstream effects of getting the right work up front. You want that right job. Yeah. And in order to do that, you need to say no to a lot of projects.
Yeah.
You don't. And you have to have the margin. You have to have a big enough pipeline to be able to say no.
Yep.
And I think that the other thing is you need the good process for turning around bids quickly.
That's good.
Where you can get these people a bid in hand and feel like I've got enough bids out there where I don't need to win everything. And if it's too exhaustive of a process too, where it's just so laborious and so intensive where you have to win it, that's a bad spot to be.
Totally.
So what can you do to optimize that process? A big motivation behind what we're doing here is to try to optimize that process. And that's been a personal motivation of mine when I was running my business. Like, what would happen if I went out to a project and could close that, or not close it, but if I could actually get to the point where we could close it within a day's period of time.
Yeah.
And if I didn't care necessarily, I mean, obviously I want to close it if it's an ideal customer, but where it wouldn't impact my business negatively if I didn't.
No, that's good.
So maybe a little long-winded for final thoughts, but it's definitely a learning process. I've learned a lot along the way, learned a lot of from my mistakes, from things that worked, from other people's mistakes, from things that I've seen that's worked. So it's like being humble enough to see like, oh, that's cool. And not being necessarily too kind of one-dimensional and saying, oh, that's the way it should always work.
Yep. No,
this has been fun. I think it's hard to pack so much into this. We should definitely revisit more of these thoughts, get some feedback from others too on sales processes. Sales is fun for both of us.
Yeah,
I mean, we both like to sell.
Yeah.
Of course, both being extroverted personalities, maybe that plays into it.
Yeah, it helps too.
But I think I've seen some very good introverts too sell, particularly if you're a business owner, because you're the experienced person, you know what you're doing.
Absolutely.
So play to that personality. Let it shine.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
All right. Rate it, subscribe, like it.
Thanks.
Talk to you soon.